There are men who defeat millions of enemies only to fall before something without a face, politics. And there are stories written in glory, yet ending in a silence so deep it feels frightening. The story of Marshal Georgy Konstantinovich Zhukov, the greatest hero of Russia in World War II, is one such story. May 1945. Berlin fell. Above the rubble of the Third Reich, the Soviet flag fluttered in the gray wind. Exhausted but radiant divisions marched into the ruined city, their boots thudding over broken bricks like the drumbeats of victory. In the shattered heart of Berlin, amid smoke and ash, Zhukov stood still, gray cloak on his shoulders, eyes fixed on the red banner rising over the Reichstag. There was no smile on his face, only the calm of a man who had walked through hell and returned alive. For Russia, Zhukov was the embodiment of victory. He was the commander who saved Moscow, who held Leningrad, who turned the tide at Stalingrad, who crushed the Germans at Kursk, and who finally led the Red Army into the heart of Berlin. His name appeared in every dispatch, every propaganda painting, every story whispered by mothers sending their sons to war. Stalin might have been the supreme leader, but Zhukov was the man the soldiers truly trusted. Born into a poor peasant family, Zhukov was not raised on speeches about ideology. He was born in 1896 in a small village in Kaluga province. His childhood was marked by fields, horses, and hunger. When World War I broke out, the 18-year-old was sent to the front. There, amid artillery fire, Zhukov learned what no military academy could teach: that on the battlefield, only discipline, courage, and cold decision-making kept a man alive. After the October Revolution, Zhukov joined the Red Army. He rose through the ranks not by politics, but through raw ability in combat. He knew how to fight, and fought so well that even those who despised him could not deny his skill. In 1939, at the Battle of Khalkhin-Gol, where Japanese forces tested the Mongolian border, Zhukov commanded a lightning counteroffensive that destroyed over 70,000 enemy troops. The victory caught Stalin's eye. From that moment, Zhukov and history became intertwined. When the Great Patriotic War began in 1941, Zhukov was recalled to Moscow. Stalin, his eyes always suspicious, asked bluntly, "If the Germans reach the capital, what will you do?" Zhukov replied, "Fight to the last man." That simple, unwavering answer silenced Stalin. Later, when the Germans reached Moscow's outskirts, it was Zhukov who stood in the snow at night, riding a small jeep along the defensive lines to keep morale alive. He did not shout slogans. He simply said, "Behind us is our home. If we retreat, we lose everything." And they did not retreat. In December 1941, Zhukov counterattacked. The Battle of Moscow became the Red Army's first victory over the Wehrmacht. It saved Russia from collapse and saved Stalin's prestige. But while Zhukov became a national hero, Stalin began to fear him. For in a country where all light must shine toward one sun, anyone who shines too brightly becomes a threat. After Moscow came Stalingrad, Kursk, Belarus, then Berlin. Zhukov won wherever he went, even when he disobeyed orders, as long as he brought results. He possessed skill, discipline, and something rare among Soviet generals: loyalty to the nation, not to any man. Stalin understood that, and both needed and feared him. When the guns fell silent, Stalin began to act. June 1945. The Soviet Union prepared a grand victory parade in Red Square. Everyone expected Zhukov to lead the army, astride a white horse, receiving the salute of those who had fought under him. But Stalin, who trusted no one but himself, thought otherwise. He feared that Zhukov's image, riding proudly before hundreds of thousands, might make the people see him as the true victor. And so, Stalin took the central stage. Zhukov, though still the star of the hour, became merely another general in someone else's ceremony. Soon after the war, Zhukov was sent away, first to Odessa, then to the Urals. Officially, it was a reassignment. In truth, it was exile. Stalin's way of removing a hero from the center of power. The official reason: arrogance, individualism, hoarding war trophies. In reality, Zhukov had only brought home a few souvenirs, a pistol, some paintings from Berlin, nothing more than what countless other officers did. But for Stalin, any excuse was enough. In the last years of Stalin's rule, Zhukov lived quietly in the provinces, commanding the Ural military district. No spotlight, no honors, no mention of his name in the press. But in the barracks, among soldiers, the name Zhukov remained a whispered oath. They said, if Zhukov returns, discipline will return. Perhaps that was why Stalin wanted him forgotten even more. 1953, Stalin died. The Soviet Union trembled. They said Khrushchev wept at the coffin, while Zhukov stood silent. He knew that when a man like Stalin dies, it is not just a tyrant who disappears, but an entire web of fear and power collapsing with him. And in that void, those who had lived by fear began to scramble for control. Among them rose a name, Lavrentiy Beria, head of the NKVD, the shadow of Stalin. Beria wanted power. Khrushchev, then only first secretary, had no army of his own, and he knew only one man could help him: Zhukov. June 1953. Moscow lay in uneasy silence. Stalin was gone, yet his shadow hung over the Kremlin like a gray cloud. Beria, master of the secret police, prisons, and dossiers, held both the sword and the shield. Khrushchev, Malenkov, Molotov all feared him, but none dared act. Only one man did not fear him: Zhukov. He had faced death too many times to tremble before another man. When Khrushchev came to him, he spoke little. It must be done quickly, Zhukov said, before Beria strikes first. On June 26, 1953, during a Presidium meeting, Beria was arrested. The order bore the signature of Defense Minister Bulganin, but the operation was Zhukov's. He surrounded the Kremlin with tanks, stationed loyal troops in its corridors. When Beria entered the meeting room, he was still smiling. Minutes later, soldiers burst in. Zhukov stepped forward, his voice low. "Comrade Beria, you are under arrest for treason." Beria struggled, but it was futile. The final battle of Zhukov's life, a battle without smoke or sound, ended in silence. Beria was executed. Khrushchev, who had cowered in Beria's shadow, now stood as victor. Once again, Zhukov had saved the Soviet Union. He believed, perhaps naively, that he could finally live in peace. But power knows no gratitude. Khrushchev had needed Zhukov to defeat Beria, but never intended to live beside a man stronger than himself. To Khrushchev, Zhukov was a symbol, useful to the public, dangerous in politics. A general too famous, too loved, was a time bomb. In 1955, Zhukov was appointed Minister of Defense of the USSR. He began reforming the army, cutting waste, tightening discipline, increasing training. He wanted the Red Army to be a fighting force again, not a parade ornament. But that determination brought him into conflict with the political elite. Khrushchev, a former peasant with little military understanding, saw Zhukov as a tool to control, not a mind to respect. When Zhukov started acting independently, refusing to use the army for any political faction, Khrushchev grew nervous. In October 1957, Zhukov attended a Warsaw Pact conference in Yugoslavia. While he was abroad, a plot was set in motion in the Kremlin. Khrushchev convened the Presidium and accused Zhukov of personal glorification, acting like Napoleon, and plotting to control the army. There was no evidence, only fear and envy. When Zhukov returned, he was stripped of all positions. No trial, no hearing. A short telegram announced, "For actions contrary to collective leadership and Leninist principles, Comrade Zhukov is retired." Months earlier, newspapers had hailed him as the hero of the Soviet Union. Now, his name vanished from headlines, films, and portraits. Zhukov realized that the cruelest act in politics is not betrayal, it is deliberate oblivion. From commanding millions, he was confined to a small Moscow apartment. No visitors, no recognition. Sometimes letters from veterans reached him, but they were censored. He spent those years writing his memoirs, not to justify himself, but to preserve the memory of those who had died. In his pages, he rarely mentioned Khrushchev or politics. He wrote of comrades, of young soldiers who fell at Stalingrad, of the sound of snow crushed beneath tank treads, of Berlin burning at night. Once he wrote, "If I survived, it was not a triumph, it was a debt." That line, simple yet heavy as lead, defined him. To Zhukov, war was never glory, it was a scar, and power, the force that once lifted him highest, was the wound that never healed. Khrushchev was deposed in 1964. When Zhukov heard, he merely sighed. No joy, no anger. "His time is over," he said quietly. Under Brezhnev, Zhukov's reputation was partially restored. He was invited again to victory commemorations. His name reappeared in print, but he no longer cared for the spotlight. In his final years, he lived simply in a small apartment on Frunze Street. When journalists came, he spoke briefly. "I did what I had to do," then fell silent. He liked morning walks, watching trams rattle past, visiting cemeteries of unknown soldiers. Once an old veteran recognized him, burst into tears, and saluted. Zhukov bowed in return, saying nothing. Perhaps, in that moment, he saw again the thousands who had once followed him, now only ghosts in memory. On June 18, 1974, Georgy Zhukov died at 78. No state funeral, no radio broadcasts, no endless lines as there had been for Stalin. Only family, a few old friends, and quiet veterans came to bid farewell. His coffin, draped in the Soviet flag, passed through Red Square, where 29 years earlier he had led the victory parade on a white horse. Now there was no horse, only the sound of footsteps. 3 years later, Brezhnev signed a decree restoring all of Zhukov's titles and decorations. Some called it belated justice, but for Zhukov, justice no longer mattered. He had endured everything: victory, suspicion, betrayal, solitude, and left behind a lesson greater than any medal. That in the world of power, glory does not guarantee loyalty, and sometimes a victor can still be condemned, simply for being too loved. Today, if you visit the Museum of Victory in Moscow, you will see a bronze statue of Zhukov on horseback, tall and solemn under pale winter light. People lay flowers, white chrysanthemums, red roses, symbols of blood and memory. But not everyone knows that behind that cold bronze lies a life twisted by the very power he once defended, the power of the state. Zhukov was no saint, nor was he a mere victim. He could be harsh, proud, capable of ordering thousands to their deaths for the sake of discipline. But he was human, with the conviction that victory must serve the nation, not any single man. And perhaps it was precisely that belief that doomed him in a system built on fear and worship. The story of Zhukov is not only Soviet history, It is the history of every place where achievement is politicized, where heroes are exalted, then erased when they cease to be useful. Zhukov won every battle he ever fought, except the last, the one against those he had helped to power. At night, guards in Red Square say they sometimes hear faint hoofbeats echoing across the stones, then fading into the wind. Perhaps an illusion, or perhaps the spirit of the marshal still patrolling the city he once saved. A lifetime he fought through war to find peace, but peace in the end never truly belonged to him.